Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's ASRG webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ASRG and get some of the legal stuff out of the way. ASRG is a nonprofit organization founded to support the development of the automotive security industry. We have developed a platform and a community to share knowledge, communicate through networks, and to build value with collaboration. This is a community for you, built by you, with the goal to protect our friends and family when using automotive products. If you want to learn more about ASRG or get more involved, please visit our website at www.asrg.io or send us an email at hello@asrg.io. Before we jump into the presentation today, let's get some of the legal stuff taken care of. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of those that have made them. They do not represent views or opinions of ASRG and are to be considered as informational. The use of this information is to be used by the individual and or organization at their own risk.
Hello, I'm from SystemWeaver today, and I would like to hold this presentation for you and hope you will find it useful and informative. The title of the presentation is Continuous Compliance, and it is about specifically also with focus about security. And now that we have more and more standards coming in the automotive for different aspects, how we can work with them in an efficient way. My name is Shahrokni. Welcome to this talk. The first part, I just want to give a little bit of a context of what I'm going to talk about. The first step is to set a little bit of a context where we're standing now in the automotive industry when it comes to cybersecurity and in general about software development. And we take a look at the cybersecurity market, some of the aspects that will increase the complexity in the automotive development, and also talk a little bit about the different demands on regulatory demands in more specific, and also some trends like Agile development and continuous updates. And then when we put all of these together, for us it's quite evident that in order for companies to be competitive and be able to efficiently develop new ways of thinking about compliance needs to be in place, which we call continuous compliance. And I will talk more about that. And when we talk about continuous, it's also quite essential that it should be data-driven and model-based. We talk also about other factors that are important, like awareness of security and safety, and how that can be built into the culture of a company. I will also talk about processes, data, and toolchain to support this transformation. So now if we look at the current state of automotive industry, we see that already today a vehicle that is on the street is probably the most complex piece of software that we have. Much more code than, for instance, Large Hadron Collider or the most advanced airplanes that are out there. This is just the beginning of a trend that we see, and I think most of you also see, that this complexity not only is not going to decrease, it will increase, and it will increase dramatically. We have a very complex supply chain in the automotive that will continue to be so. And we have the connectivity of vehicles, also a big factor in driving the complexity, driverless and autonomous vehicles, electrification, and cloud solutions. And all of these will increase quite dramatically in the coming years that we have ahead of us. So if we now take a look at some of the trends that we see, there is this trend of creating standards and asking compliance for those standards. And it can be anything from functional safety, cybersecurity, or even ASPICE about processes and so on. some of the key points that need to be addressed there, why we have this standardization, is of course it's to improve the product quality. That is the main point. So if we adapt ways of working that just tries to see these matters as some document that need to be generated at the end of a project, then obviously there is a little bit of a problem with that way of looking at things. Another aspect is to create awareness about quality, not only in one organization, but to have a language among organization and also within organization to talk about quality and understand what is at least the minimum level that you need to get to. And since vehicles are so safety and security critical, this is even more important. And it also helps us establish methods, so you don't need to wonder about what methodology to use all the time. It also establishes frameworks to, as I mentioned, to know kind of have I done what is required, have I done enough, and how can I show it, because it's also very much about creating trust and transparency. And as I mentioned, also there is this aspect of having the same language to be able to communicate about these aspects. Until just a few years ago, when a vehicle got out on the street, then the OEMs were, to a large extent, from a development perspective, done with it. But now this is changing. And as we get more electrification and vehicle V2X, vehicle to infrastructure and other vehicle features, then a lot of other avenues of both improvement in terms of feature development and also bugs will open up. These bugs also need to be fixed, and the feature development to address new business cases will need to evolve. And for that, as you might know, UN has a regulation R156 for software updates. This is going to make a big difference. This standard has been established because of the realization that this is going to be a big area that will come out. When we have these software updates, the OEMs and also all the other stakeholders will have a responsibility to continuously deploy new software onto the vehicles. And hopefully the hardware has been considered there as well. So you have a hardware that can already be used to evolve your software. So it's not only software, but I'm emphasizing that. And when you're sending these deliveries, it is very important that the documentation and approval, it is ready for assessment in a sense, that it is in place. Because according to this standard, it's not enough to just write a security case or a safety case when an assessment is performed, but you need to show that during the whole time from the previous assessment and type approval, your car has been safe and secure. So this is going to have a big impact on how we need to work in the future. Yes, and bug fixes and feature development, these are two different aspects. One is more about enabling new business cases, and one is about doing what is necessary to keep the car safe and secure while it is on the road. So far, we have most of these done by recalls, which are very expensive. And since the frequency of these updates will increase, that is not a viable solution for the future. From another side, this will also, the development project is not really finished when the car is out on the street, but we need to always keep an eye on the vulnerabilities and threats. And one thing is almost certain, and that is that what you design today, there will be technology that can break into it and reveal its security vulnerabilities in let's say 10 years or whatever years because what do you need to guarantee as an OEM is right now the number is not set, but for many years ahead. Actually, right now the legislation is saying that as long as the car is on the road, you need to guarantee it. Its safety and security. But now there are discussions about what would be a more kind of pragmatic number, like 20 years, 25 years. And in those years, the technology has evolved so much that you need to be ready to patch and fix some issues with the vehicle. So for all of this, we need to have proper argumentation for why the car is safe, and also keep in mind that there is a lot of turnover in personnel. So people leave, and that kind of knowledge and competence needs to be captured to the extent that it's possible. So now if we look at cybersecurity as an area, this is an area that is worth $2 billion in 2021. And now I'm quoting some numbers from a Markets and Markets report. And the projection is that this area will grow very rapidly, 21% almost a year, annual growth, until 2026. So we will end up with a little bit less than triple the amount or the market size. We see that, for instance, in Asia Pacific, there is a 48% of the cybersecurity market in 2021 is in that region. So just to emphasize that this is a very widely and global effort. And most of the cybersecurity market is right now in passenger cars, but of course we have light and heavy commercial vehicles as well. What we see is also that almost $500 million of this market share, the 2 billion that we have, is on communication and telematics now, and it's projected to grow very rapidly, even more rapidly than the entire cybersecurity market. Software has also, as expected, a lot of complexity is there, but that doesn't mean that we can neglect hardware. It's still $500 million industry there. And we see also that the cloud services will also increase very rapidly in the coming years. So if we look at some of the drivers and challenges behind this growth, we see that the complexity of the software is growing very rapidly. I will come back to it when we talk about autonomy. The supply chain, of course, is going to remain being global, and it's going to expand. Right now, we have Asia Pacific and we have Europe and North America that is very active in automotive development, but the rest of the world will also catch up in their efforts, as the numbers or predictions show. We have the clouds, so a lot of data from the cloud is going to be transferred between vehicles and cloud. So this is by itself a very big security, an area of concern for security. We have electrification, which means that more and more of the functionality in the car will also be electrified. This, together with autonomy, is driving that, which opens up new threats to how a vehicle can be attacked. We have the need and challenge of updates, frequent updates. We have connected vehicles, V2X. And here also huge amount of data is going to go back and forth between vehicle and other vehicles or infrastructure or cloud and so on. we have autonomy. This is a big, maybe the most complex thing that human beings are going to do on this scale. There's going to be a lot of novel technology, very advanced technology here, and that technology is right now untested on such a huge scale, at least. So this can also create and open up a lot of vulnerabilities in vehicles. And then we have, of course, the compliance, which is a kind of a way for us to counteract this complexity. And the requirements on compliance are increasing. So with this background, what can we see? And I want to point out here that a lot of the things that I'm going to discuss now are based on our experience. So then it's a good time for me to tell a little bit more about who we are at Systemite and about our product SystemWeaver. So SystemWeaver was established around the year 2000, and with this insight that software and electronics in vehicles is going to grow very rapidly, and it's going to be very difficult to manage it if it's not done in a good way. We have the experience from hardware and mechanics before with the PLM systems that do a great job in managing the complexity there. But on software side, at least year 2000, we are very fresh. And the complexity has just increased and will continue to increase, as I mentioned. So our basic idea has been to establish what we call a software PLM that is equivalent to the traditional PLM solutions, where the focus was, as I mentioned, on hardware and mechanical parts, to have this similar kind of orderly way of looking at software. Because we're not only talking about code when we say software, it is about the whole idea since its conception until it becomes a line of code and it runs on vehicles and it needs to be updated. We see there are a lot of tools for different purposes, like requirements management and the system design and test management and so on, or even analysis tools for safety and security and so on. But it is also very essential, in our opinion, to have a unified and I don't want to say centralized, but a way of kind of connecting and making sense of this data. Because it is not random data that you just want to search in, but you want to use this data to actually generate and automate a lot of your business processes. So that's where we try to position ourselves with our product called SystemWeaver. So now, with the background and a little bit about our experience, we want to take a look at, okay, so what do we see is the direction forward? And I would call it continuous compliance, which means that you need to be compliant all the time, continuously, in the same way that we have continuous integration and continuous deployment. We are more used to doing this on code level, but on documentation, design, traceability, and all of these aspects, we as an industry haven't come to the same maturity as we have on pure software code. And for this, now I want to emphasize and talk about 4 areas: processes, toolchain, culture and management, and automation. So let's go to those slides and see what we can say. So about the process and organization, what we see a lot of the times happens in a company when, let's say, if you're a tier one or even if you're an OEM, that suddenly a requirement comes that we need to be, let's say, a SPICE level 2 compliant, or we need to be compliant with the new cybersecurity standard, as it is the case now, or functional safety. So what happens a lot of the time in those baby years of at least in the past, it has been like this, that when you have an agile development with many teams which have quite broad responsibilities and sometimes end-to-end responsibility for certain features, then we go to them and then we say, okay, you need to be a SPICE level 2. But in our opinion, this is not the right way to go, because we have seen how much confusion and lack of clarity in both the way of working and in the data that this approach creates. So I think it's essential to have a kind of data backbone and process backbone to rely on for this purpose. And this process by itself, then it needs to comply with all of these standards that we need and the requirements from the standard that we need to fulfill. And in this process definition, we need to have clear linkage from these steps wherever it's applicable to the compliance goals that we have that are coming from these different standards. And one reason is obviously to do, let's say, gap analysis towards a standard between your process and the standard, but it also allows teams to customize their process while still knowing what kind of compliance goals they need to fulfill. And this traceability between the compliance goals and the process becomes very essential here. Another thing is to kind of transform these compliance goals into what we call now in Agile world is quite common to talk about definition of done. So it's not enough when you only have a working code, but the documentation and compliance documentation need to be prepared as well before you're allowed to actually send out software or the entire vehicle out on the street. And another thing I want to emphasize here, that it's very important to start analyzing, like doing security and safety analysis quickly. Everyone talks about this, but we need to also have means in order to do that in practice. And those means, in my opinion, is to have a clear process, but not only a process that is published somewhere that you can go and read, but it's a process that has been implemented through good tool support. And that has a lot of benefits that we come to in the coming slides as well. What we also see typically is that, I mean, we are human beings. We don't have knowledge about everything at the same time. So usually you have this kind of competence. You have people with good competence and knowledge about, let's say, safety or security. And it's very important to kind of capture that knowledge both in the process design, but also more importantly in the everyday communication in a company. So another aspect now that brings us to naturally is toolchain. So what kind of toolchain what kind of properties do we need in our toolchain? And of course, one thing that we discussed is that we need to have this kind of compliance controls and measures, and also follow up and supervision of these measures over time. So it should be almost automatic. Whenever you want a certain overview of how things are going for your development, it needs to be there. I understand that what I'm saying is quite trivial for many of you, but it's also worth mentioning. Traceability, very important for change impact analysis, to see when you make a change, what does it affect. It's very important for being able to generate data, because then you can create this trust and transparency only when you have good traceability, and for that matter versioning, so you see exactly what has changed on a fine-grained level between two versions of your design, requirements, tests, and of course code. But code we are better at. Now we're emphasizing on the other parts. Transparency, I mentioned as well. And now if we zoom back again to where I started the presentation, with all of these requirements and challenges that are coming, it's very important to automate as much as possible, and not to waste energy and time of the development teams on doing things that can be automated. So when you have this traceability, versioning, and a good and kept together data flow, then you can generate what is what needs to be documented, and you can also monitor it in real time to see where we are lagging behind. Another important aspect is that all of these compliance controls will enable you to actually work with these aspects like safety and security and quality integrated in your everyday work, because you see right away where you're lagging behind on some of the aspects. Although it might not be feasible or realistic or desirable to always work with all the aspects at the same time, but it will give you a good indication of where you have down prioritized one aspect of your design for a long time. It also having a good connected toolchain, and I would say even emphasize the data part of the toolchain, the kind of the data backbone that this toolchain is implementing. It helps to align this kind of both compliance controls with the process, and it helps also different teams to align with each other on a much more factual and data-based grounds. Another aspect is catalogs. We have a lot of catalogs for security and safety now, but also it is important that inside a company we assess things in the same way. So for instance, when you're talking about a threat, it shouldn't be that the measurements and the attributes you set for a certain threat, like the risk level, is different between different teams. So it's an important aspect to harmonize these as well. And it will otherwise it will have a big effect not only on your company's way of working, but all the supply chain connected to you. And also having a good data backbone enables reuse if it's done in a good way, which can save you a lot of time and make the data much more consistent, or your way of thinking much more consistent. So a lot of these lessons we have already been able to implement in software world. So now in the software PLM world, we need to get there as well. So another aspect that I want to talk about is culture and management. So we have heard about security culture. We have heard about safety culture. These are things that are easy to say, very difficult to both measure, implement, and actually see, okay, where are we lacking? So there are many aspects to this, of course, but I want to emphasize the awareness. So when people know, when it's clear what is needed, this brings a clarity to the entire development process, instead of giving them thousands of pages of standards to read. And when the communication with the teams is much more active, in a sense that it's almost like they're asked before they deliver something, they are asked whether you have thought about these and this and that aspect. How did you tackle it? How can you show it? And all of these things. This comes together with the tool chain and the process model as well. And also another important thing here, if we have a good culture, and if people feel more involved and responsible for the product, then the level of engagement, study after study shows that the level of engagement increases, which means that they are much more likely to think of the possible threats that their feature or their code might represent or might lead to. One other big problem when it comes to culture that we see, which creates a lot of frictions in the organization, is that the safety and security teams see themselves and consider themselves only at gatekeepers. And I think this is very important to minimize. Instead, they should be working on measures that are not too intrusive to the teams. It doesn't kind of affect their efficiency, but at the same time, this process and tool chain meets all the requirements that are needed. Another aspect here, when we have end-to-end responsibility on the teams, that we see is that there needs to be a wide but quite basic understanding about aspects like safety and security in the organization. So it's not enough that you only have a certain number of people that are experts in a matter, but every developer that makes code or develops hardware, they need to have a basic understanding that at least that certain things are important. So when they're not sure about something, they can also go and ask about more knowledge about this. So this is often called as a kind of a T-shaped competence. So you have people have a wide but narrow understanding in many areas, or I would say most areas, and then they're expert in some areas. Another aspect of communication, I touched upon it a little bit, is that the communication needs to be continuous and active. So why continuous? That is because just because someone tells us something, it doesn't mean that we understand it. We start understanding something when we start tackling it and when we need it. So the data, that information should come continuously and over time, and with some persistence as well, until the culture is created. And it should be active in the sense that you're not referred to some web page or some PDF document to see the process, but you need to also inform. You as a developer need to inform what you're doing, and that both the process that you're using and actually the data that you have created that meets all the criteria that are needed. So we're talking about a lot of education here, wide education. Maybe even in universities there will be much more focus on this kind of development with quality, and even focus in the automotive industry that gives this breadth to the students and the ones who want to start working in such embedded system development. Another important aspect I want to mention here is to minimize assessment efforts. So now when we don't have a good data backbone, when we can't generate everything, when we haven't documented the actual process, not just the prescribed process, but the actual process that we did in a project, then assessments are gigantic effort. It costs a lot for companies, and it takes a lot of time from the development team to actually do the work, and it creates a lot of uncertainty. That's the worst aspect, and really reduces kind of the energy and the motivation of the teams, which will in its right reduce the output of the teams. So you can see, for instance, in the financial world, when the bookkeeping is done properly, then an assessment it's more or less about an assessor going through the documentation and maybe asking some questions here and there. But right now in automotive, it is almost a panic event every time an assessment is done, at least in many of the cases that I have seen. Maybe some companies are further ahead on that. So this is a very important point for me. So now when all of this in place, then comes all the fruits of it, which is that you don't need to, when you have done the work that is needed, when you're done with your definition of done, and everything is already in place, then you can generate security cases, which might include the product data already generated through the traceability, process data, even deviation of the process data. This will already take you to ASPICE level 3 and above. And also kind of mapping your process data to the compliance requirements, as we mentioned, so very much easier to perform an assessment, for example, and being confident in the quality that you're providing. You can keep track of the competence information. You can manage it. You can see where the gaps are in the confidence in order to reach it. Let's say a T-level kind of competence for your employees, and you can plan for that, what is needed, how they need to be educated, and also you document it, which will be a part of your security case as well. And of course, another part of the product data is also, it's not only about what we want to do, but to show that we have actually done it with evidence, with reviews, tests, verification, and so on. And all of this data then can be generated. So that was the main point that I wanted to make here. I hope it was clear. I talked about challenges. I talked about a lot of complexity that already exists and will grow and grow, as we see in the coming years, where we're going to climb this mountain that we see some parts of it here. And we also, I have also emphasized the importance of continuously being compliant, and talked about these 4 different aspects and maybe a little bit more. And I hope you found this a informative talk, and I'm very happy to talk to anyone who might have a question. We are with many of our customers. We're traveling along this path, and I hope that we will get there. Not we just as a company, but we as people and industry, we will get to a good position that we can both ensure quality, and we don't need to jeopardize our output, and we can still evolve without being kind of heavy down by all of these aspects to think about. Thank you very much.